Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. Today's guest is Jodi Wellman, and her new book, You Only Die Once, is a super fun way to embrace death, which is obviously something that is very near and dear to my heart. Jodi was a former corporate executive turned executive coach with a master's degree from University of Pennsylvania, where the work of positive psychology came out of. So she worked under Marty Seligman, who was the father of positive psychology. And this book is great. And this conversation was so much fun. We laughed all about death. We talked about how you can use death to really help you live, which is obviously the big premise of this podcast. She doesn't include the afterlife piece. I do. So we had a little fun chatting about that. And it was just a really lighthearted conversation about the little changes that you can make today that will make a big difference in terms of how you're thinking about living your life, the choices that you're making, the choices you're not making, which are probably even more important than the choices that you are making, how consciousness plays into it. And there's just a lot of really great overlap here, which made for an awesome conversation. And make sure you listen to the end. I take it another step further than Jodi in terms of her concept of 4,000 Mondays. So with that, here is today's episode of Life, Death, and the Space Between. Welcome, Jodi, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Ooh, I'm so excited to be here with you, Amy.
The energy is already moving between us, and on the topic of death, no less, right? So how can we, you are a woman after my own heart with this book, You Only Die Once, which I was reading this morning and as I was preparing for this interview and was underlining and thinking about, okay, great tip. I thought I knew this, but what a cool way to look at it. So first, can you paint the context for me here of kind of how your own experience with death pushed you into looking at death as a way to help live?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And by the way, thanks for the compliment about the book. I think it's a great compliment when a book gets well lived with highlighters and clippings and underlinings and rippings and all that. So that's good to hear.
Right. And next to the bad, let me keep this here as a reminder.
Right. Exactly. It needs to be banged up like a well-lived life.
Right.
Well, I come by this topic of death in a couple of ways. One is just I've always been fascinated by the absurdity of it all, that we are going to die, each and every one of us. It's bizarre. And yet while we're here, we're all striving so hard to live life fully, which is what I advocate. And yet the weird juxtaposition of, trying to live like we mean it. And then all of a sudden, poof, it's over. That has just never not been, thankfully, amusing to me in an absurd way, rather than existentially anxiety inducing. So I've always found that to be an interesting conundrum we face as humans. And then, my mom died when she was 58 of a heart attack. And that was unexpected. And to be super honest, the experience of her dying is not for me a story of grief turned into interest in death. That's not my story. I think it is for some. For this situation, my mom died, sad, and yet I was cleaning out her place and her desk. I wish I took a picture of it, because upon cleaning out her apartment, her repository of all the dreams and business ideas and all the plans she had for herself that I was throwing out, like they got buried with her. That was heartbreaking for me. And it was a wake-up call, because I know that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, that's my inclination, is to have all these dreams and ideas, but maybe lack some of the confidence to go ahead with them. And it was this, it literally took my breath away, that not only do I not want to die early, if I can control that, but oh my goodness, I do not want to I do not want to die with all of these dreams stuck in limbo. And so that for me was this idea about living life fully, doing whatever we can to not get to the end with regrets of these coulda, shoulda, wouldas.
So what does fully mean when you say living life fully? I say the same thing, but I want to really contextualize that for people, because I think everybody has different ideas, and then doing that within the confines of our everyday life that has to be lived in order to live, right? Like paying bills and, going to a job that maybe you're not happy with, and whatever it is for each person.
Yeah. And I like that you're asking this right away, because I get a little bit worried that when I talk about things like, you only die once is absolutely a cousin of you only live once. And there's this, and I use the words astonishingly alive, which I recognize can set up someone to roll their eyes and say, yeah, I want to live an astonishingly alive life too, but I got to go and pick up my prescription, and I got to go take the kid to piano practice. And like you said, I got to go work my job, whether it's a dead end job or not. And so here's where I would love to provide, yes, the context and maybe a little bit of, breathing room, is that an astonishingly alive life is relative to each and every one of us. And I look at it in a framework of living wider and deeper. So this is not just about living longer. I think most people would agree they'd like to live long, but as long as the quality of life was there, Mm-hmm. So the way I look at quality of life, it's living wider with vitality. That's the fun and the pleasure, and then living deeper with meaning. And that's where it's the having a purpose, a sense of any kind of purpose, having really good quality relationships with people. It might involve spirituality for some people, but it's that deeper side of living. And so we need both, right? The widening and the deepening. And I think for us busy people out there trying to get stuff done, it's that paying attention to, hey, where might my life, do I feel like I want a little bit more in my life? Now, in honesty, most people have some sense of wanting a little bit more. Even when things are going well, we want it to be even more well. Or when, we have a sense that maybe, we're having a meaningful experience at work or raising kids, but we're feeling a little bit bored and we want a little more excitement. And so what does that mean to you? It's relative. Excitement to you might mean going and booking a very 5-star extended trip involving yachts. Okay, if that's for you, go for it. But for some of us, it might mean planning a really special picnic to just really enjoy Saturday afternoon and feel like we got outdoors and we made those egg salad sandwiches we haven't made in a long time, and we just got to laugh and have fun, and we brought a game to play. Like, so it's all relative, but each and every one of us has that inner sense of, do we feel like we want a little bit of more, and is it in the widening, is it in the deepening, or maybe a bit of both? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that concept of widening and deepening. It takes to me, as I'm always doing, taking almost like the practical and the spiritual, even though you don't call it that. That's how I kind of see it, is like that spiritual kind of, who am I and am I living? I always talk about essence. Am I living the essence of my being in all of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And can I ask you a question? Because so much of this comes down to the knowing. Like, how does one know, in your opinion, in your experience, whether one is living the essence of their being? Because for me, it's that sense of like, there's that niggling sense, I call it, when we're feeling like, I think I need a little more. But how do you tell?
Yeah, I think that I think about how hard life feels. Like, does it feel like I'm constantly pushing against life versus that life is sort of opening for me? That it just seems, I call them the lily pads. Like, it just seems like things kind of just pop up and you're like, oh, I'm going to take that lily pad and that lily pad, versus like, it feels like you're kind of trudging through quicksand or something. And every step you take just pulls you down. And I think it's really about tuning in. If you're not tuned in and if you're not conscious, then you're not even going to be able to begin to have that awareness around what is pulling me down, holding me back, versus what is presenting itself to move me forward.
Ooh, I love the way you put that. And I think we're kind of related in different ways where, I would talk about like diagnosing the dead zones, the parts of your life that may feel a little bit flatlined. And so a lot of my language is about what makes you feel alive. Versus what, obviously the other end of the spectrum, dead inside. I mean, if we could eliminate that job and those people and those activities, great, where possible. Right. But this checking, like you said, the attunement, the tuning in, wait a minute, like, it's funny to me that, like, I'll do workshops, for example, and I usually ask a question, what makes you feel alive? And first of all, some people have to really stop, and it's like deer in headlights. Like, wait, what makes me feel alive? And then it helps when someone else gets the ball rolling, because then they start to, give an example. It's like, oh, well, when I'm painting, and then, or it's when I am out at the lake with the dog, or whatever that is for somebody. When I'm writing and I'm in a flow of writing, and then people go, oh, okay, I have some examples, but many of us are actually not actively in tune with the stuff that helps us to feel most engaged with life, and like what takes your breath away. And I think sometimes we just need a chance, like in a workshop, for example, but to do that, to really pause and take stock. Like, wait a minute, if I knew the answers to the test, I could do more of it, right?
Totally. And I completely agree. I love the way that you're framing that as like, what makes you feel alive? It's those questions, I think, too, that don't give us pause. Like, I'll ask this in therapy sometimes with people. It's like, what is it that you feel like you need right now? Ooh. And usually people will be like, I don't know. And I'll say, well, stop and let's think about it. Like, what is it you feel like you need? How can you turn inside? Because I think we're so often looking externally to like, what is going to give us what we need? What is going to make us feel alive? And it's like outside things. But I think you can feel, and I've been having this conversation with myself post sabbatical, because I think I felt so alive taking time just for myself, and I have to return to everyday life, right? Which but reality. And it's like, okay, where can I find that aliveness throughout every day, rather than it needing to be when I just take a step away from everything?
Yeah.
If that's a word.
I say aliveness. I've even tried to make a word alive-alicious. Not quite taken off. It's a little mouthful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Aliveness. And knowing, back to the attunement of noticing, these are the things that either bring me joy or just undeniably breathe life into me. One of the things I've noticed, in addition to people feeling a little out of tune with what that is, I feel this consistently. I'll ask, okay, what's an example of something that absolutely undeniably lights you up? And people will, take notes, say it again if it's in a live session, and then people will share. And on many cases, when I ask, when was the last time you did that thing? The gap is unbelievable. So for some people, it's, oh, no, every single day I'm watching the sunrise. If that's the thing that's most enlivening for you, great. Other people, it's when I'm rock climbing. Oh, wow. Tell me more. When was the last time you did it? Oh, well, it was before COVID, or I give the example in the book of a gentleman at a
almost
workshop.
5 years ago at this point, right? For those who lost track of time in all of this.
Yeah, it used to be okay when it was before COVID still was within a reasonable time frame, but now, this it's a bit of an eye opener for us. That are there things that are opportunities to feel like we're savoring so much more out of this one chance we get, and it does take, unfortunately, the unglamorous act of planning. So for some people, if it is rock climbing, well, it's okay, you're going to need to sit down, look at the calendar, coordinate with your buddy, plan the trip and make the thing happen. But then you're there and you're feeling alive. And is that not worth it?
Mm-hmm. And so can you talk to me a little, because I love this concept, about the difference between playing to win versus playing not to lose, and how people live their lives more as if they're just playing not to lose, which I noticed myself doing in pickleball yesterday as well. And it's a very different, how you play is very different. Not to simplify it, but it is when you're attending to that within yourself.
Yeah. And I'll share with you that this is something I have to watch out for personally, because sometimes playing it safe is the most sort of psychologically comfortable place. It's the proverbial comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so depending on what it is, and I'll choose an example about, let's just say you have a dream, a goal for yourself. Maybe it's that you want to go for the bigger job at work. And maybe you are feeling like you're capable and you're excited and you want to contribute more and all the things. But so to play it safe is if I don't apply, then I won't get rejected. I won't have to deal with those feelings. And so I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and maybe I'll get noticed. Yeah, okay, keep waiting on that one. And maybe they'll like handpick me for the job versus, that's playing safe. That's playing not to lose.
Playing small.
But playing to win, playing small. Yeah. Playing to win is about taking the risk usually to say, okay, well, you know what if you did put your name in the ring and you interviewed and you could get it and you could also not get it. And that applies to all the other things in life, whether they're the things like starting your business or starting the podcast or writing the book, or sometimes it's even the smaller stuff that we play safe. So again, playing not to lose. Sometimes it's that, think about a hobby you may have that you want to rekindle. I know so many people that want to get back into running or get back into playing the guitar, but they're not consciously aware of it. But by not getting back into it, that's a way easier route than it is to maybe get back out and start to run and feel unfit and bad about yourself, or to pull out the guitar and start strumming and realize, you ain't no musician like you were when you were in college. And that has a feeling attached to it. And so we play safe because we just want to stay comfortable enough or keep the dream in this like well-preserved little hermetically sealed environment where it's this delusional land of later that we'll get to do it. And so, it really comes down to having courage. I think in many cases, courage to live. And that is not something we often think about, but, there's a good quote, like, man is the only animal who has to be encouraged to live. I think Nietzsche said that. And we do often need a little bit of that boost, which quite frankly, all this talk I do about reminding us that we're going to die is me being an annoying little gnat trying to poke ribs. And mixing metaphors and trying to get us to wake up and say, oh, you know what, maybe I should pull out the guitar. Maybe I should not care so much if I'm going to sound horrible, but it gives me joy and I want to do this thing.
Well, and it does feel a lot safer, but also there's a dream connected to the I'm going to one day. And then when you do it, if it doesn't work out, it's like that dream becomes a crushed reality or whatever it is. Or maybe not. Yeah. Maybe it becomes a dream fulfilled. It could be either of those things. But when it lives in that safe space, it stays really safe and dreamy in our minds. Yes. And so it becomes like, it becomes this unfulfilled fantasy, but it almost feels better as that than the reality sometimes of what could or could not be.
I want to graph chart this because there's something that is a little bit romantic about like the dream I have for myself down the road.
Right.
Whether it's romantic or just that like intoxicating potential of what could be. And many of us are living in that land of the life I'm going to live. And it can be, and we know this from psychology, right? Like there's these things called positive fantasies where it can provide just enough of that little dopamine, serotonin, enough of that hit to make you feel good enough about the thing you have in store for yourself. But let's just be super honest. This is back to where I want to chart this. The little tiny hits of hope we have for the life we're going to live when we do have the time or summon up the courage, that just simply doesn't compare traditionally to the feeling of getting out there and giving it a go. Even again, if the outcome is not what we intended, because there's a sense of pride that comes from the feeling that you tried. There's a sense of like life's getting lived around here that we have with that. I'm the kind of person, this is like this notion, in psychology, like I'm the kind of person who gives it a go. I'm the kind of person who plays to win, even when I don't get to win in the end. And that's the kind of person that I feel like I am proud of, that I'm willing to take some risks and participate in my life rather than sit on the proverbial sidelines, because that experience is a second-rate life. And I think we deserve better than that.
What is it about this notion of when I get there, like the dangling carrot of, when, whatever it is, when I get to retirement, when my kids get out of the house, when those I feel like are really kind of the big ones in my mind, because I'm starting to think about both of those things, but it's always like or early on, like when I make X amount of dollars, I will, or when I I don't know. There's a lot of them. Like when I get the promotion, then I'll take a break and take the trip, or like all of these what is that about for you? You studied with Marty Seligman, who my very dear friend was also in his lab at Penn. Or studied under him, I think she did some research for him. So he is kind of the father of positive psychology. But what is it about that thinking of like when I ...
Yeah. Well, there's a related concept, which it would be remiss to not point out, this notion of this like destination addiction. It's like there's this preservation of like, I'll be happy when, like when I, like you said, get the job, make that much money, lose that much weight, move to that town. So sometimes we put a lot of our eggs in a basket of believing that my real good life will begin then. And so sometimes that's just a little bit of a fallacy that we fall prey to. But more germane to the question you're actually asking, we do this thing where we dupe ourselves. So we don't like to talk about death. We don't like to imagine that we are, in fact, are all totally careening towards an end. Of course not. It sounds lousy. And so we do this thing where
I always say, and maybe there's an afterlife. Like, I think there is. But we could have that conversation on another. We could talk about that in another podcast, because I'd love to.
Totally. Yeah. Like they say, like 60% of people have that feeling of like, there's more later. But as far as this life goes, as I'm relating to like, well, you only die once in this life, with an asterisk.
In this physical body. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. But we, in order to get through our days and not have crushing anxiety or depression, we don't necessarily dwell on the finite condition. So we do create this, it's almost like it's not delusions of grandeur, it's delusions of longevity, where I will just I'll get to do that later. So we're pushing the can down the road of our dreams. And we've all seen this. We all know stories, right, of people who saved up not just their money to live when they retire, but their dreams and their plans and their travels and their volunteer things, all the things they wanted to do. And then they get to retirement and then they get really sick. And maybe they die, but not always. They end up just incapacitated and able to live out the lives that they had planned for themselves, that they had delayed and postponed, because they believed that, whether it's that concept of personal specialness, which is part of existential psychology, which is this idea like other people age, I'm going to somehow be a little bit special and somehow avoid that. Like I believe, by the way, I can see this in myself. I see older people with super bad posture and they're hobbling along. I have bad posture already. This is even crazier for me. I somehow believe that when I am older, I'm going to still be quick on my feet and I'm going to be upright and I'm not going to be the one slowing people down getting off the plane. Why? I'm not special, but I somehow think I'm going to be better than that. Mm-hmm. We somehow think we're going to have more time, or that we're going to escape the ravages of illness or injury or debilitation. And so, oh golly, so it's like we're deluding ourselves, and we do it again for good reason. But now this comes back down to this reality of like, let's splash cold water in our face. Let's take this conversation from being a total downer and saying, let's use this as the motivator, right? Let's if later is elusive, whatever later is, because again, you might die or you may not have all your marbles when you get there. Good luck starting your business if you're like half-witted and all the things. And you may not be able to have full mobility in your arm to play all that pickleball you want to play.
I already don't.
What about now? What about now? Right. What about today? What about this year? This is like, the whole, like, you'll never be as young as you are today. You'll never have as much now is our chance. So let's start identifying what some of those things might be that we want to do, long to do, we're curious about, and just simply prioritize. Well, what would be a cool thing that you could start to take action on next that would make you feel like you're the kind of person who lives your life, that doesn't delay your life?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm thinking too, I always like to bring this into to help listeners think about what this looks like concretely. And my best way of doing that is using myself as an example. And I think about like my recent sabbatical, which I took, which my listeners all know about, was really difficult for me. And I talked to my mentor and she was like, if you, God forbid, had some illness, would you think twice about stepping away? And I'm like, absolutely not. And so she says, so what's blocking you, right? Like that question of what's getting in the way now from making you take that next step. And then I was able to tap into like the guilt I felt abandoning my patients for 6 weeks and how are they going to deal and what what does that say about me as a person that I'm doing? Like all of those belief systems that we have about what it means to self-care and take care or to live, what it means to allow yourself to fully step into that life.
Yeah.
In terms of, in some ways, what we've been socialized against, which is like, put your head down and work as hard as you can and until you can't do it anymore. And then you can pick your head up and look around. And you're saying, no. Look around this whole time at this life.
Yeah. Right. Life's getting lived now. And today may be an unglamorous Thursday for you. Yeah. All the more reason. And that takes me to just a silly notion because it's on my mind today is the idea of, we save things for later, the good china or the good bottle of wine or the good dress.
I save the china
jewelry.
just because I don't feel like cleaning it by hand, but.
Right. That actually came up a lot. I've done some research and I polled people on Instagram and that was one comment was like, I really want to use the good dishes, but I'm going to get water spots on the good crystal. But it's worth it. Like we don't need to do it every day or then it's not special.
Right.
But what about the thing of like life's getting lived now? We get to celebrate a random Thursday in your life. And that's actually all the more reason to do it even more than your birthday or any other day. It's like the gift of life that is precarious. Just to throw the rent, just to bring the Grim Reaper back in. Like, this is not a promise, it's a premise, this idea about what's coming up tomorrow. And so it is about savoring. It is about just being conscious. And I think back to earlier, like this isn't then about a breathless attempt to stuff it all in with like a manic, gotta just complete everything on the bucket list. Cause that also to me just sounds exhausting.
Sometimes I feel like those people who have jammed it all in, this is a soul conversation, and then they die early. I'm always like, oh, did their soul know something that, that they didn't consciously know, but like they knew that they had a short period on earth and they were going to cram life into it at all costs. Cause there are those situations too, which again, another conversation maybe for another time, but certainly,
it is fascinating.
Yeah. How do you see habits as potentially limiting our lives?
Yeah, I'm super suspicious of them. So when we find ourselves in autopilot, and usually it's like we're like 3 beats behind. We don't catch ourselves before we're in autopilot or at the early stage. It's after we have found ourselves becoming like these highly functioning zombies where we're going through the motions. And that wording's literal, going through the motions, kind of glazed eyes, doing the same thing day in and day out. And our days sort of become indiscernible.
Dave Matthews calls it, right?
Yes. So it's because we have succumbed like little really productive and efficient robots to habits and routines. And here is where I will just say, because I recognize habits are very near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, myself included. I like things very organized and efficient. And I also am aware of the cost, the toll it takes in my life because it does dull the edges and it makes life a little bit more of a monotone. And I think, but I want to live in vivid color. And that's where we have to stop and take stock. Where are your habits still helpful? Like it's helpful, for example, that you might have a workout routine where you're going to work out on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sundays, for example. I don't know. But are you doing the same thing again and again and again? And it's going to glaze you over versus, okay, I don't want to jostle the days or times I go because that's like, I got to keep that train on the track. But what about trying a very different thing? Like do the weird boxing class where you wonder, how do the boxing gloves smell? Go find out. Go do it. Try something different. If you go to the same restaurant, this one's always very, very, very controversial for people. Like, do you order the same thing at the same restaurant, right? Mm-hmm. Like I know when I go to, I like my same breakfast scrambler, but what if it meant trying something different just for the sake of it? Unless that's going to totally ruin your day. And I'm not here to ruin anyone's day or life.
But if we're down to that like one breakfast that isn't great is going to ruin your life, then there's probably bigger problems we have to deal with.
Right. This waffle wrecked it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But changing the routine, right? A different route to work, a different date night, just being aware of when you are losing consciousness. Because that's the benefit of a habit, is that we just don't have to think. We just get to click in and like do the thing, make the coffee. Don't have to think in the morning about all the steps, because your brain can't possibly be super present to everything. The stimulation overload would kill us. Of course, we need to glaze over a little bit, but not with everything all the time. So just pick one thing at a time. It might be like, hey, I know we have a whole ho-hum Saturday. I was just talking to my husband about this on a walk. I feel like I want to shake it up. Like what if we just completely didn't do the normal thing we do? And what if we had our coffee and breakfast outside, and then we went for a drive to somewhere that we haven't been yet, and then came home and did the laundry and the grocery shopping and the usual things.
Yeah. And it was interesting because as I was reading through some of these in the book, I was sort of like cursing at you in my mind. And clearly there's something there, right? And thinking like, oh my God, noticing the like twinge of anxiety that some of that brought up for me, and thinking about even my own life and where you can make small tweaks. And then when you recognize what that brings up for you, right, then that allows you to go deeper in terms of, okay, so what is this about? That like, I'm like I'm a Sunday morning, 8 a.m. grocery shopper.
Yep.
And if I go at 3, there's longer lines, it's more crowded. Like that gives me anxiety, because I'm like, I can do it,
Yep.
I can name that tune in 20 minutes at Trader Joe's at 8 a.m. But like at 3 o'clock, it might be 45. Yeah. And so you start to play these games with yourself on like rationalizing, well, then you must go at 8. And it's like, well, but if I don't, I'm not going to die, probably. I might just be a little annoyed.
Right. Well, and then this is where we can really get picky and choosy. Like, I like how you're naming 2 things at once. It's that there is maybe a story that you're telling yourself that, like, to confirmation bias, why it needs to be done at 8. But you're also being reasonable and saying, like, I've been at 3. I don't like going at 3. It's bad. Well, then that might not be the way to do it. It's like, what about the spirit of, when you go on a vacation and you're in a totally new town and you maybe go to the grocery store, like, unless you're staying at a hotel or whatever, but you go and you're like, ooh, and it's all different. And your brain is doing all these little explosions on the inside in a good way, because it's novelty. And what we're really talking about here, and this is all based in the evidence of psychological science, where like novelty is a really important part of what our brains and bodies and mind, like, we need in order to experience something different and make new connections, etc. But you're on vacation and you're going through the aisles, and it is just a completely different experience. And maybe you see a new spice that you wouldn't normally have made at home, and you buy it and you put it on your corn on the cob later. And it's like, well, this is kind of cool and different. That's kind of like the version of what we're looking for in a very different way. And so maybe going at 3 o'clock would just be miserable for you. That doesn't to me sound like a good Sunday, but maybe it's that, could it be maybe the version is like committing to buying a totally new food that you wouldn't normally, and having it for dinner that night just to shake it up a little bit. And again, there's nothing to lose, because if we look at everything as this grand adventure, and you try like my husband and I have tinned fish. Everyone's eating tinned fish these days at all the fancy restaurants.
Tinned fish?
Well, now you're not going to not see it. It's out there.
What's tinned?
They're all fancy.
Like sardines in a tin?
Yeah. Well, these are like, they're like, oh, they're fancy. It's from this part of Italy or this part of whatever. And you crack it back and it's the smoked trout of whatever.
I don't know. I was just in Portugal, and everyone who was Portuguese was like, don't eat the tinned sardines. It's a crock. So I didn't.
So maybe it's all sham here in the Western world. But we tried tinned oysters. Yeah, we're never going to do that again. And yet it's just a funny experience where we had this thing, and it was like, yeah, we gave it a go, and wow. And we, to be honest, we have this thing called the Book of Bad Calls, where we almost joyfully put examples of things that go awry so that it helps you to celebrate the snafus. And you can bet we put tinned oysters in all caps in that night.
I love that.
My point is there's no loss.
Yeah. That's fun.
Yeah.
So
celebrate.
Yeah, celebrate it all. I wanted to talk a little bit about Memento Mori, because I talk about this a lot in my work, is this notion of a contemplative death practice that you're thinking about every day. And how do you do that without allowing it to bring you down?
Great. Yeah. Memento Mori is the Latin phrase that translates to remember we must die. And there is just a ton of experience over time, over the centuries, of practices, like you said, of contemplating death. And then it now moves into the scientific studies about what that does for us. And so just to give like the underpinning, this idea about temporal scarcity is what they call it in psychology research around remembering and focusing, not remembering, but focusing on the limited nature of something that we value is the very thing that helps us to appreciate it. So if we knew we were going to live forever and ever and ever for all of eternity, we would really not treasure our lives that much. And we'd put every dream off because we could just do it in 3 billion years, the goal. So knowing that we are finite, this is kind of where all this stems from. It's like, that's the motivator that we do need in order to see our time as actually precious and treasured and valuable. So the idea around contemplating it and not being brought down is, I think it's about acknowledging it and then flipping the script for the service of it. So it's not saying, let me think about my death. Let me think about how gory it's going to be. Let me think about how sad it'll be at my funeral. Like, we're not going down those paths, at least not for long. But we're talking about, yes, the fact of it, the acceptance of it, like in a very Buddhist kind of way, like pure, honest, open acceptance, noting it, not being afraid of it, acknowledging it and saying, wow, it's coming, and hopefully not soon. But in light of that, how do I want to make that the motivator to do something with more intention and urgency today? So it is about the acknowledgement, and it's like, yes, and an improv. Yes, sucks, death's coming. And what is something that maybe I've been putting off that maybe now that I've recalibrated and I'm in the habit of counting how many Mondays I have left, and I change the number every Monday.
Why is it Monday? Other than what in my mind I think is like how we all feel about Mondays, but go on.
You're onto it. Yeah. A lot of people will say, why didn't you call your business 4,000 Fridays? And I said, well, that would have sounded like way more fun. But Fridays are always sort of delicious for people. It's always like, life's always pretty good. And because Mondays are more visceral, especially when we're working. And even after people have retired, Monday still has a feeling where it's an indication of, am I liking what I'm waking up to do this week? Or am I not? And is that a way that I can do a little bit of a litmus test?
I think I'm going to change mine to 4,000 Tuesdays.
Ooh, do it.
I think Tuesdays is a rough one too. Because it's I'm now in it. Right. It's like when kids go to preschool, they're always like the first day they're so excited, or the first week. And then the second week, it's all downhill from there. That same,
such a good point.
The first day, maybe you're like, ooh, I'm going to see my work colleagues and, get back to my schedule. And then Tuesday, you're like, here we are again.
Yeah. There's no rosy hue of the weekend anymore.
No.
So
and it feels far away.
Tuesdays do suck. Right. Well, so it is this visceral idea. It's just a contemplation again of, okay, am I liking my life? When I want to do this week? And back to positive psychology, you mentioned it earlier. One of the concepts is this idea about savoring, and we can savor in the present and in the past and in the future, which is just a cool feature of the human mind, is that we're able to imagine. We can recall, so we can, savor the past, look at your pictures about a good time you had, like your sabbatical. You could savor the moment, which, a lot of experts recommend, be in the moment and recognize, the smell of the bakery I just walked by, and look, there's a tulip coming out of the soil, and But savoring for the future is actually super fascinating, because research shows when we anticipate anything on our calendar that we have to look forward to, it could be a trip, it could be a time with a girlfriend. Like, I've got a happy hour tomorrow afternoon with a friend, and I'm just so looking forward to hanging out with her and having cheese. And that's going to be a great time. Mm-hmm. And, there'll be wine, but it's really about the cheese. So, so these are things like that I recommend, low hanging fruit of living a life you love. It's like, have something in your calendar every week, month, and year in advance that you can just simply look forward to. Mm-hmm. And those are the ways that we can kind of rig our lives. And so, all this is about, yes, death is coming. There's a quote by Virgil that I really like. It says, death twitches my ear. Live, he says, I'm coming. Mm. And so that's the whole thing is, because there's the shadow, why not just go ahead and spend some time in the sun before the shadow overtakes you? Mm-hmm. What's sunny for you today, this week, this month, this year? action.
Jodi, I love your energy. I love how you frame this. It's so uplifting and fun, which is what I always wanted to do with death, is make it a little bit more of that, because I do think it is what makes life worth living, frankly. Like you said, like without it, if there's no end, there's no urgency to anything. There's no like oomph behind anything you do. It's like, I'll get to it tomorrow. So You Only Die Once is out now. It's a super great, fun, witty guide. Like, you totally get your personality through this book. I was reading it like, oh, can't wait to talk to her tomorrow. I do read very quickly. And it's just great. And it's got great tips that you can use and apply to your life. And it does not bring you down. It only brings you up. So, Jodi, tell people, if they're interested in your work, where they can find you, where they can find your work, how they can get to know you more, and where they can order the book, of course, which is usually Amazon and everywhere. And
yeah. Well, thanks for asking. And also thank you for your kind words. Coming from you, they mean a lot. I respect everything you do. And so thank you. It lands, and I'm going to savor it. And yeah, I'm over at 4000mondays.com. And there's a page on the website for the book where you can click any link you want to darn well go to. And then there's also a resource page on the website that will calculate how many Mondays you have left if you're not interested in doing the math yourself, which I don't blame you for not wanting to do.
And you can find me at 4000tuesdays.com. No.
A very well-respected competitor.
The afterlife. Right. 4000 Tuesdays is the afterlife of 4000 Mondays, where we go beyond the death.
You're onto something. I will support you to the end and beyond.
Well, Jodi, this was so fun. Thank you so much for all of this. It was a really great interview.
Oh, thank you, Amy. This is great.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.